Okay, today I'm coming at you with another quick video, or maybe it won't be quick once I start talking, you know how that goes. This is a fun and interesting story for the Star Wars fan and for the NASCAR fan, or for both. So, as I recently explored the history of NASCAR and some of its most notable names, inevitably the Earnhardts come up. The Earnhardts being arguably the biggest name in stock car racing outside of course, the Pettys. I will probably do a video on the Petty family as well, but NASCAR just had its Darlington race, which is a throwback race, a cool race, one of the oldest tracks in the country. I think the second oldest track that's still actually used for stock car racing. And it's one of the races where they actually do cool throwbacks on the cars. So it's one of my favorite races of the year. I love the old throwback cars. I mean, they're still the same new cars, but they do throwback paint schemes, which is kind of fun. But when I was studying the history of the Earnhardt family, I realized that it's eerily similar to the Star Wars story. And I was looking for this online to see if there's anyone else who's talked about this. And I'm sure other people have picked up on this, notably because of Dale Earnhardt Sr.'s car that he was sort of infamously known for driving at the height of his career in sort of the late 80s and 90s. I'm going to show you some pictures of those cars, his car and also his son Dale Jr.'s car, because I think it'll help to go to this my point I'm making. But I thought this would be a fun story to share with you, so stay with me here. Okay, so most people probably at least loosely know the name of Dale Earnhardt. They probably know there's a senior and a junior. They probably also know that Dale Earnhardt Sr. died tragically in a race of his own, but they might not know all the back history of this and why this is really a Star Wars saga. Okay, so like many NASCAR families and many the families in stock car racing, Dale Sr. grew up around it. His father, Ralph Earnhardt, was a stock car racer. He raced in the NASCAR circuit. I don't remember if Ralph Earnhardt ever actually raced in the Cup Series, which is the highest level of stock car racing. But I think he certainly raced in the Busch Series, which is sort of like the second tier level, but still, you have to be a very talented stock car racer. But Senior basically starts getting into it at an early age and starts to show incredible aptitude, also at a very early age as well. And he starts to develop a bit of a name for himself, but he's sort of known as being this quote-unquote intimidator. He has this ability to sort of get behind people and rub them or push them or use the arrow of his vehicle to shove them out of his way. And he kind of gets villainized for this because he tends to wreck people on the track. And he becomes this sort of controversial figure that some people love and some people hate. But he kind of runs with it, which is sort of a smart marketing scheme on his job. And he ends up being known as the Intimidator, okay? And he takes on this sort of villain role in NASCAR. But he becomes one of the most successful, one of the most celebrated, and one of the most loved and hated drivers in all of NASCAR. As he eventually changes companies that he runs his cars with, and he decides to change sponsorship, and he moves to the GM Goodrich sponsorship, which he'll later become known for, he decides to adopt a new paint scheme. And the paint scheme is a black car with sort of an off-white, gray accents and also red accents. Truthfully, just as a cool, interesting caveat, the actual color on the actual vehicle is actually a burnt orange, but apparently they painted the burnt orange so that on television, because back then, this is before like digital photography, the color would show up on TV as red. But the point being, it was this sort of red and black scheme with this sort of off-color gray, the same colors of basically Darth Vader in Star Wars. Now, I've heard that some people call this the Darth Vader car, and there's some people who believe that the actual paint scheme was based on Darth Vader. There's other people who claim that no, that sort of came after the fact, after he got known as the Intimidator and he drove this dark black car to kind of come up behind people and bump them out of the way. That sort of kind of just went with the idiom of this sort of villain character, and then it kind of got to be known as the Darth Vader car. But either way, whether it was intentional or just a happenstance of history, this becomes known as the Darth Vader car. I'm going to show you a picture of it real quick, so hang on. Okay, here we see the black car with the red and gray scheme. This is the sort of Darth Vader car made famous by Sr., Dale Earnhardt Sr., the Intimidator. Again, rumored to maybe have been inspired by Darth Vader, but either way, here's a quick look at, for example, a Sith starfighter flown by Darth Vader, and you can see the primary black color with the sort of off gray or light gray, off white, with the red, which emulates Vader's outfit and also, of course, his lightsaber color. Okay, so that was the car. You can see the similarities. Now, here's where the story gets more interesting, okay? So Dale Earnhardt Sr. gets into stock car racing, and as a result of that, he's traveling all the time. He ends up divorcing his first wife. They have 2 kids, a son and a daughter, not unlike Anakin Skywalker, who, of course, has twins. Now, his son and daughter are twins, but they're close in age, and he ends up basically sending the kids off to live with their first wife, okay? Now, in the case of Star Wars, of course, Darth Vader, Anakin Skywalker, doesn't actually know he has the kids because his wife dies. But in this case, the 2 kids go off to live with their biological mother. And Dale Earnhardt Sr. goes off racing, and he spends his weekend racing. He ends up getting married to a different woman and living this life as the Intimidator, driving around in his Darth Vader car. Well, when the kids get to a certain age, their house at home, they have a tragedy, okay? And their house gets caught on fire, and they have to leave home, and their biological mother can no longer care for them, so she sends them to live with their father, Dale Earnhardt Sr. Now, they didn't grow up really knowing their father much, so not unlike Luke Skywalker and Princess Leia, who didn't really know their fathers. But they go to live with their father, and he basically takes care of them, more or less, but he's mostly traveling doing his sort of stock car racing. Well, Dale Sr. is a young, kind of cocky, sort of arrogant, blonde child, not unlike a young Luke Skywalker. But he's a little bit more amiable in personality. He's a little bit more friendly and less confrontational, shall we say, excuse me. He himself starts to show aptitude for racing. Now, what's interesting about this is his father doesn't get him into racing. He does this completely on his own, sort of behind his father's back. He starts going to junkyards. He starts picking up pieces of cars and building his own stock car so he can do some racing in local circuits. He reaches out to some of his father's crew members and mechanics and stuff there that work on site at the family farm. They sort of help him get a car together, and he starts racing. Well, not unlike his father, Dale Jr. starts to show incredible aptitude as well and starts winning all these races. Eventually, Dale Earnhardt Sr.'s crew members and things who kind of are helping Dale Jr. out, kind of like, hey, have you been keeping track of Dale Jr.? Like, he's doing really good. Well, of course, as we know, Dale Jr. starts to emerge in the Busch Series himself, starts winning some Busch Series titles, and gets the opportunity to move into the Cup Series, okay? His father actually allows him to do this and helps him get a car together, and they end up racing for what becomes Earnhardt's race team. I think they're called EMI, maybe Earnhardt Motor Incorporated, something like Motorsports Incorporated. I think might be something like that. I should know that off the top of my head, but it's eluding me. Anyways, the young, cocky, brash, blonde Earnhardt Jr., who's new and starting out in the Cup Series, also gets a car of his own, and he does a reverse color scheme of his father, which means it's basically an off-white car with accents of black and red, which is not unlike the starships and battleships that are flown by Skywalker and the Rebels in Star Wars. So I'm going to show you the Dale Earnhardt car. This is before he gets the Budweiser sponsorship, so I'm going to show you that real quick, some of his vehicles that he drives. Okay, so here's that. Okay, so here's Junior's car. He races a bunch of different color schemes, but you can see from these 2 pictures the similarity in both the colors and the color scheme, and how the patterns and look kind of matches even the X-Wing flown by Skywalker. Okay, so now you can see the similarities there. Now here's where the story really gets interesting. Earnhardt, as we know, is known, Earnhardt Sr. is known as the Intimidator. He has a conversation with one of his pit crew bosses, and he's basically trying to learn how to better maneuver his vehicles while on the track. And the story goes that, and I can't remember which guy it was he spoke with in the crew, but it's irrelevant, the guy's like, well, you got to think about the way the air moves, basically trying to explain to him aerodynamics and how air works. And he says, well, think of how, like, when you're driving down the highway, and it's raining. Imagine it's raining, and you can see the water coming off your car and coming off the cars around you, and how the water moves. And for some reason, that just clicks with Earnhardt Sr., and he describes it as being able to see the air. Okay, not unlike the Force. He sort of has the Force, and he's able to basically maneuver his vehicle and use the arrow, see the air as it's coming off the vehicles, and use that to push himself around the vehicles and around the other cars and push them out of his way. And this ends up kind of being his defining characteristic as a leading motorsport expert in the stock car fields, that he can sort of quote unquote see the air. And even in interviews he'll say things like, oh, I could see the air really well today, I was really moving good. So again, kind of this element of having the Force, right? Okay, well, here's where this all really comes to a head and becomes very, very interesting. They're in the Daytona 500, and now he has a complete race crew around him. He has himself, and he has his son and his good friend, who are all on his team, and they're racing. And he of course is still the primary driver of the team, and he's still always out to sort of win. That's kind of his goal. He's the intimidator. He'll knock people out of place, wreck them, in order to win. So the plan is to win. Junior's young. His friend is in the race as well. Michael Waltrip, by the way, is the other member of the team, who's one of Dale's good friends, Dale Sr.'s friends. And something happens. They're racing. And by the way, Dale Sr. had always had trouble at the Daytona 500. He had been in the race many, many times. He had never won it, but finally he wins the race a couple years prior, and that was the one big race that had always eluded him. And as the race is coming towards an end, there's a caution flag. And the caution results in sort of people pitting and a reformulation of the lineup of the vehicles. And it turns out that all three of the Earnhardt vehicles are in the first three spots. So it's Michael Waltrip up front, it's Dale Jr. Behind him, and then Dale Sr. behind them, and they're in the first three spots coming into the final couple laps of the race. Now everyone's assuming that Earnhardt Sr. is going to do what he's always done, which is to move around at the end and sort of do his slingshot move, see the air, use the Force, use his Darth Vader car to surpass everyone and win the race. And then something interesting happens. As the race starts to come to a close, and as they're coming to the final lap, rather than moving around everyone else and going for the win, Earnhardt Sr. actually starts using his Force to block all the other NASCARs behind him, so that his son and his friend Michael Waltrip can actually win the Daytona 500. And it's not what anyone expected Earnhardt Sr. to do, but it is what he does. And as a result of it, Michael Waltrip ends up winning his first major race, and Dale Jr. ends up coming in second. But unfortunately, in the process of blocking these other cars and vehicles off in order that his teammates can lead and win, he ends up wrecking his car. Now, Earnhardt Sr. had been in many wrecks before. In fact, survived some of the worst wrecks people had ever seen, so people aren't really worried about it at first. But lo and behold, that ends up being the wreck that takes his life. And he ends up dying on the track at the Daytona 500, basically using the Force to save his son and to provide his son with victory. Again, not unlike Star Wars. He becomes a household name of the sport. He becomes lionized. He becomes an icon because of this event. The sport grows in great popularity, and of course, the person who carries on the sport after him is, of course, his son, who actually ends up becoming the most beloved and popular racer of his era. And while he's not as talented as his father, Luke Skywalker wasn't as powerful as Darth Vader, he sort of is the person who carries the sport into the next generation. And that is a great Star Wars story, I think. Okay.